Hello, this is Tim Wilde with Wilde Discourse, and before I get into today's episode, I wanted to just kind of give a little bit more of a background on what happened here. I was meeting with a friend of mine who works for the church in the church education department, who used to play football for BYU. His name is Greg Adams, and I'm going to introduce him once I get the video started. But that's a tricky thing because the video never starts. As I was in his office doing this podcast or this recording, the cameras weren't connecting onto my laptop, and the microphone was fine, but you could hear my voice, so I don't know how fine it is. But it picked up everything okay, but it was kind of a unique situation versus just sitting here over, doing a Zoom call with someone. But I wanted to just point that out, that the microphones were not working, that the cameras were not working, and that's why we don't have video on this one. And I'm not going to play around with a bunch of images or whatever and do a bunch of stock footage recordings or anything. So you're going to get what you get. But I did want to just kind of illustrate a little bit more background on what we're going to be talking about in this podcast. Greg Adams had played BYU football years ago, and we talk about that. And I wanted his perspective and maybe a little bit of a more insight of a previous player coming from a church-owned school, and kind of what that experience was like playing against different teams and being involved with different organizations throughout the world, or throughout the country. I don't know how world expanding his experiences went. But what happened was I saw this this article on Deseret News, but I wanted to pull up the actual story from the Stanford Daily, which is the website apparently for the Stanford College school, to hear what their news was about what happened, because I thought maybe the church's, a church favored article might be leaning in different ways. I was curious what their actual stance were, and there was a few more insights in here. So I'm just going to quickly read this story about what this is about. The Leland Stanford Jury. This is the Stanford Daily by Caroline Chen and Yastiki Guru. I'm just going to kind of quickly just blur through this because this gives you the context before the discussion starts. The Leland Stanford Junior University Marching Band apologized on Monday for a skit during a halftime show on November 26th football game against BYU Brigham Young University, which depicted a lesbian wedding. The skit, called Gay Chicken, depicted two women getting married, quote, for time and all eternity, close quote, and then being told to be fruitful and multiply and to replenish the earth. The simple phrases that are used during the marriage sealing ceremonies within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the sponsor of BYU. Again, this is their newspaper, not ours. Well, not our school or anything. Members of the band student leadership wrote that they issued the apology following, quote, acts of intolerance complaints issued the apology following, quote, acts of intolerance complaints filed against or to the university, close quote, for using, quote, phrases from scriptures held sacred by LDS community, close quote, in a statement to the Daily. So, just stopping right there for a second. This was a response to complaints that they got from the community that some people were offended. This comes up in my discussion with Brother Adams. Let me continue. The band leadership wrote that they were, quote, unaware of that specific phrases used in the show are part of the sealing ceremony sacred to the LDS community, close quote, and, quote, deeply regret the impact this action had, close quote. However, so they apologized for the verbiage because they didn't know it was specific to those wedding ceremonies. And now there's nothing that was in the dialogue that they just said. Acts of, let's see, where did they go? Oh, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. That's scriptural. And for time and all eternity, that's not like super sensitive or delicate or sacred. I mean, this concepts are sacred, but I don't feel like those words specifically come off too offensive or intruding on our beliefs or anything. It's kind of basic, but it's very poignant on what they were trying to get around to. But this is where it gets interesting, and this didn't really come out as much in the Deseret News article, which is why I wanted to stop and give this a little bit of background. Sorry this has taken so long. It says, however, the band's student leadership said that they do not regret the band's choice of the skit topic, and, quote, will forever stand against homophobia, close quote. Quote, we are appalled by the homophobic responses to our show, and we will continue to call out bigotry and provide a safe space for queer people and allies, close quote. BYU previously explicitly banned, quote, homosexual behavior, close quote, in its honor code until as recently as 2020, and currently still prohibits same-sex dating. So this is their explanation of the stance that they feel that the standards and the beliefs and the codes at BYU are contrary to their opinion or their feelings representing homosexual communities. This is how it reads to me, but it says that they're very bold about this. They say we are appalled by the homophobic responses to our show, and we will continue to call out bigotry. So they're appalled by the homophobic responses. They think that us responding to not us. This is important in this podcast, that Brother Adams and I kind of talk about the correct response to something like this that happened, not necessarily getting all uptight and frustrated and hostile, and I'm not saying you can't express your concerns or frustrations or pains as a member of the church that felt offense. That's fine. You can express that. I don't know if it was an uproar or anything, but they said they were appalled by the homophobic responses. Now, the homophobic aspects of it, in their words, homophobic. But anyway, the gay lesbian stance that they were making and the mockery of the LDS ceremonies about marriage, those are two different issues. Brother Adams and I kind of talk more about the marriage aspects. He kind of alludes a little bit to the homophobic, that there's two women. I didn't really go into that because all I saw was the picture that it was on someone's cell phone or whatever, and it didn't. It was hard to see really who was there and who was involved. But it was two women being married and being told to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Obviously, that doesn't work, which completely is funny because it leads into our stance and our beliefs on the purposes of marriage and our positions on homosexual relationships and that behavior. We believe a certain way because of our context of the plan of salvation and God's plan for us and procreating the earth, as was just indicated in what they had to say in their dialogue. But I don't feel that necessarily constitutes such a frustrated backlash or people being too overly sensitive about it. Now, I don't think that their attitude is necessarily helpful. I don't think they're on the same page as others that try to get a comprehension of where another position is. It doesn't seem like they researched or looked into maybe why we feel the way we do. Maybe they could look into why we have same-sex dating codes in our schools, why we believe the way we do, and obviously anyone attending BYU, my thoughts on it, they don't have to attend BYU. It's a great school. It's an accredited school, but if I was going to go to a school that had certain standards and codes that I strongly didn't believe in, I wouldn't, that would go into my decision to attend that school or not. But I wouldn't go there trying to shake things up or things. And there have been a lot of stories about this kind of thing the last couple of years with BYU. Now, I don't necessarily agree with or fully know all the codes at BYU. That's not the point of my comments here. I'm just saying that the position of this group, the band, that they wanted to make their statement, which they're free to do. It's their choice under the Stanford rules and their codes. They're free to present their halftime shows and get out whatever message and their stances on whatever they want to. They're in that whatever beliefs or ethics or values or movements or whatever they want to present or represent. Now that's under the Standard Daily. Now according to this, the Standard Day or Stanford University is going to in the future make sure that things get approved for those kind of process or those programs and those presentations. So they're going to do that. It does say here, and Brother Adams gets to this, that they have a long history of lighthearted and satirical halftime performances, and they have definitely done things towards BYU in the past. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention here is this stance by a member of the church. I just want to read this. He says apparently this is he's a member of Standards Latter-day Saints Student Association. He says, I don't know what all the fuss is about. This is Buddy Norlander, who's 24, who's been an active member of the church his whole life and is a member of the Stanford's Latter-day Saints Student Association. He says, the gripes about the halftime show from a few members seems I can't read. The gripes about the halftime show from a few members seem to run contrary to how even the church itself responds to things like this. Close quote. Norlander said that the Latter-day Saint community at Stanford is generally more open-minded and accepting of LGBT rights than the more conservative institution of the church. Still, he said that the church's stance is usually, quote, not to be taken offense at things like this, close quote, bringing up that the famously brought ads in the playbill of the satirical musical Book of Mormon, and which is funny, we didn't read this, but we actually talked about this. I don't remember if it was on air or after we talked about, but Brother Adams and I kind of brought up that example and other things. I think it was after we stopped recording, but we had a little bit more conversation. But yeah, we mentioned that there it's kind of a turn the other cheek kind of a perspective. Anyway, that's enough from this article. It's just kind of interesting that they apologize. It seemed like they apologized out of obligation. We didn't know for sure when we did our discussion, Brother Adams and I. It's not like we were pointing out, trying to get to the bottom of that. But to me, it's interesting that out of the backlash, it was like a forced apology from the school, and then the school is like, it doesn't uphold their standards, but they still are going to, in the future, do what they're going to do. Nothing wrong with any of that. All we can do is work with other schools, interact with them. I'm part of BYU. The school BYU can go play the games and just tolerate whatever their feelings are about intolerance towards them. Just like any other member of the church, anywhere else in the world, we have different things we're experienced with. And people outside the church, they would say the same thing about us. That, they would have to go play football at a school that has gay, lesbian rights and dating codes and things like that, and they're homophobic. Well, it's the same concept. We're going over there getting persecution for our beliefs. They're coming over here maybe feeling uncomfortable or maybe disgusted or repulsed because of their values being contrary to, or our school being contrary to their values. I don't know. I wanted to talk to Brother Adams about it because he has some experience. It's been, it's not in today's world where these specific issues are quite the uproar, but I think there's some parallels with things that he would have been dealing with back when he played football. And so that's why I wanted to talk to him about this story, get his insights and his perspective. And I think it was a really good conversation. He had some good things to say. Good conversation about this and how to handle and maybe how to respond, just like this young guy Norlander said, to kind of turn the other cheek. That's kind of the essential part of it. Be open-minded, and don't take everything so offended. Just let the world do what it's going to do. We're not going to change. Well, he's not saying we're going to change anything. It's just that's not what I'm trying to say. I guess it's just you need to let people express and do what they're going to do, and then through example, through righteousness, through teaching opportunities when they're there, through faith, through staying worthy of the Spirit, through loving other people and just staying on the high ground. That's what's going to change hearts, and maybe down the road people will have a little more interest in seeing why we believe what we believe about homosexual dating at BYU, if they care about what we believe about the plan of salvation. But they're not going to get anywhere near there if they don't understand that we try to be Christ-like in the first place. I don't know what the responses were specifically, but as members of the church who got this story back here, like even me, if I hear about a football story, then it got a little big. So anyway, those are my just kind of my preface to this conversation. I'm going to get to the recording right now with Brother Adams, and I want to thank him for joining me in this discussion. It was really healthy and really good, and I think we talked about some things and some parallels about life, not just sports and athletics and school programs. So I'm going to get him on there, and I really appreciate anyone listening to this and supporting Wilde Discourse. I really enjoy the potential and the opportunities I'm going to have in the future to talk to people I care about, people I don't know, and just to hear different opinions, different perspectives from mine, from other people that have a voice, and that's everyone. That's enough for me, and let me bring on Brother Adams, and here's our recording. Again, sorry there's no video, but you get the audio, and that's the point. So thanks for listening, not thanks for watching. Welcome to Wilde Discourse. I am here today with a friend of mine from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Church Education System, right? CES
Yes.
system. I don't know why that sounded weird all of a sudden. He works for the church in the church education department as an institute teacher and coordinator and recruiter for the youth, trying to help them understand the institute program. For anyone listening to this that doesn't know what that is, the church has several programs or different levels, starting in high school, where kids can take church classes, studying the gospel, studying the scriptures during their high school curriculum. And then once they finish high school, they move into the college level, and then they can take actual religion classes that meet those credits to continue to learn the gospel in a huge variety of topics. And Brother Adams, Greg Adams, is here with me, and he's actually one that I taught a couple of classes with in this last few semesters at the Salt Lake Community College, South City. And it's been wonderful getting to know you. He's become a good friend, and he has a little bit of a background in the story that I wanted to talk to him about. And so that's why Greg Adams is my guest today. Greg, thank you so much for being willing to shoot the breeze with me on here. Before we get into the topic, you have a history in football, and you talk about it quite a bit in class. So before we start into the topic, I just want to kind of let you kind of tell us about yourself a little bit, your history. I don't want to date you, but you can say who you played football with. And that would probably paint the picture.
It would, I think.
Yeah. But go and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, we didn't quite wear leather helmets back then, but I think pretty close. Yes, I grew up as a young man. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, Reading, Pennsylvania. And then we moved to Arizona as a boy. My father and my grandfather both played professional baseball.
Wow.
And as it worked out, I also was eventually able to play a year of professional baseball and in the minor leagues. And I love that.
I don't know if I knew that.
I don't know that we've talked about that. I think it was just football, right?
Once I hear football, I check out. I don't hold on long enough to get to baseball. That's where I'd be a little more interested.
But as a kid, some of the coaches saw me and said, you got a pretty good arm. You got some speed. Can you throw a ball? So I played a little quarterback, actually ended up kind of playing wide receiver and running back more. So I did that in high school, and then I went to Phoenix College.
I don't know what that means. Wide receiver means you run wide and you receive the ball. Running back means you retreat.
Well,
you run back.
It's been so many years that a wide receiver for me right now would probably fit the definition a little bit better.
Your waistline.
But yeah, you're a little further from the quarterback. You're kind of out there, they try to throw to you. And
quick on your feet either way.
Yeah, and you have to fake people out with moves and everything.
Okay.
And great experience. And so I ended up going to Phoenix College before my mission. And then I served a mission in Germany. And then I came back and transferred up to Brigham Young University, BYU, and played on that team there for a few years. And what might date me, maybe there's some names if any of you are interested in sports at all. Some guy named Steve Young.
Oh, I've heard of
played
him.
For the San Francisco 49ers, was on that team. And also Jim McMahon, who was the quarterback for the Bears, also won a Super Bowl. Both of those quarterbacks won Super Bowls. And I was on what they call the Miracle Bowl team in 1980 with just a little over 2 minutes left. We scored 20 points, and on the last play of the game, had a touchdown pass by Jim McMahon in the end zone.
Cow.
A miracle catch. Well, probably one of the greatest endings ever. It's always in the top 10 list.
Wow.
So
did you share that you shared that in a class one time, didn't you? Is that the one that you shared in class?
I could have done that, but the problem is when I say the Miracle Bowl now to young people, I just get this blank look like, is this a product to clean toilets or Miracle Bowl? What is that?
That's funny.
So yeah, I've got that little bit of that background, and so I
Nice.
played, against different teams and different
Right.
venues,
Yeah.
and also playing for a church team like Brigham Young University. You represent the church when you walk on that field. Then it's pretty much okay. Here comes, quote unquote, the Mormons, and Mormons in different venues can have different connotations, with different groups of people. And we definitely would hear that as we went to a variety of different places.
That's exactly what I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about, because we know I don't care about football. I don't follow or understand it. I played for about 2 weeks my sophomore year. Then I got a girlfriend. I said, "Oh, I don't need football anymore because I got a girlfriend." But what you just said is right on topic. I'm going to share this for a second. We're not going to read through this article here, but this was in the Deseret News, and I sent this to you. And I knew I was very sure you had already heard it. But let me close this ad here. Let me actually push the right button. Okay, here's the headline says, Stanford Athletics says it, quote, deeply regrets offense caused by the band's halftime show. And then reading through, I kind of glanced through it. I didn't dive deeper to see what the actual incident was. There was a picture on here, but apparently they kind of did a mockery of our temple ceremonies, a gag or joke about polygamy, and the dialogue, say something like live long and not live long and prosper. What is it? The be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, whatever. And
I think wasn't the situation where there were two females and it was a wedding ceremony, right? Were you gonna?
Yeah, that's what that picture. Yeah, and there it is right there.
Yep.
I mean, it's a little blurry. It's hard to see it, but yeah, for time and all eternity. There's specific verbiage that represent a mockery of our beliefs in the church, and it was at a Stanford versus BYU game.
Which I must interject, BYU did win.
Yeah, I did see that, and then I did scroll down, and as funny as a little headlight, by the way, they won. But that doesn't matter, and it's not about this specific story. Isn't why it's where we're not going to read through it. It's not just about that, but it got me thinking, and I understand that the experience of BYU football players have in the world today, interacting with and being involved with other organizations, other teams, other schools, is probably a very different experience than what you probably felt. But at the same time, it doesn't mean it's better or worse. I think I wish I paid enough attention to, I don't know, to know or care about or reach out to football players. It doesn't matter though. A current player though is interacting with the world that's in this information age that they know a lot more if they've ever looked into it or heard about it. If they've been exposed to anything about the church, they're probably a little more informed to the point that they could find that scripting to make a parody that they were going to put into their gag or into their show. In your time, I would imagine, and that's why I'm going to have you here to kind of talk about it a little bit, it would be a little more of the ignorance of the old days, like that we have horns and tunnels going to Jerusalem and all kinds of crazy stuff, that all these weird things. And there was enough with Steve Young about his magic underwear, and he's shared stories about those kind of things. But I imagine the misconceptions about the church are drastically different, but not necessarily more or less offensive and painful for an athlete who, like you said, represents the church. When you go out there, and I've heard that, and that's why BYU has such high standards, because people look at those students, and the student body of BYU has to represent the standards of the Lord's school. Not the Lord's school. That's definitely not the way, because we all know that the University of Utah is the Lord's school and the school of the prophets. But
they are all Lord's schools, okay, right? Education is a good thing.
Yes.
Some may argue what I just said, but yeah,
but I think
it's a good thing.
I think it's a higher standard. It's a good thing that's a higher standard, because people do look at those schools, BYU Idaho, BYU Hawaii, Ensign College, others, and they say, if this is how the students act in that campus, even if they're not members who go to these schools, that means that's how the church behaves, or that's what the church thinks. In your time, I believe it was much more conservative, a lot more higher standard probably than today. You couldn't have sodas on campus or whatever. I don't know. But I wanted to ask you and let you kind of talk about what was it like as an LDS athlete representing a church school, interacting with other schools, and like what was the challenges? Did you have persecution, or is that just something that just is new?
No, well, let me first say is that we often get caught up in the idea where, like, okay, we're in the social media generation, so everything is so much more, inflated,
Yeah,
and everybody knows, and everything. However, if you talk about the effect on one individual,
Mm.
right, it might not go all over the world.
Yeah.
Maybe it stayed at that stadium that day, but you still feel it.
Right.
Just as if, and if not as much, because that's your community.
Right.
Or a nearby community.
Right.
As if it was broadcast on social media today.
Right.
So
like a story like this is going to make the headlines, and people are going to be, oh my gosh, look what happened in the school, and all those people and members of the church now can read this story and get all uptight about it or upset. And that's another thing I wanted to ask about, is how we should react to that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in your time before social media, like you said, it may have been a more intimate or personal experience, or something people were yelling or whatever.
Still is impactful.
Exactly.
And newspapers were a little slower, but they would pick up on a lot of these things.
Really?
Now, it depends on what newspaper. Right. So a story like this that maybe was published in the Salt Lake Tribune yeah. might find its way into Associated Press, but each local city will determine what they want to print in their newspaper. Yeah. So it kind of depends on what it is and if it's interesting enough. So I believe that what happened in Oregon recently and other places, and also at Stanford, probably during that time would have been picked up and probably would have been in a lot of papers over the United States.
And I don't follow Deseret News or anything, but that's the funny. When I just searched for it just now, the apology is what made the headlines, not the actual incidents or incident. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I think that's interesting, maybe. And sometimes that's the thing. It's like, well, let's make a big deal out of it now that they responded. Like, that's kind of the world we're in, where if someone apologizes for something, then we're like, oh yeah, and now we jump on them. Like, you should be ashamed, and we start hammering in and just taking advantage of their humility or their vulnerability from that position. And it was the band. I don't know how halftime shows and all that work, but it was the band's thing, and apparently they've had a little bit of a reputation, it sounded like, but the school itself had to apologize for what the band did, saying it was unbecoming of their standards. But
so they have a tradition there at Stanford, depending on the school that they play, and they try to find something for each, especially the Pac-12 schools, in the conference that they're in, that they can do a satirical tweak to, really? In the halftime show, something, and that's just kind of Stanford's tradition, what they do. And so for BYU, obviously, it's a religious school.
Easy target,
and what are some of the things that were in the news or, being talked about? And so that was the one that they latched onto.
Yeah. Which to me is very unimaginative, to go after polygamy. Like that shows very little research. When I saw the content, I was like, that's what they came up with? Like, there's so much easier, more juicy things, but that's very surface level, low hanging fruit, you could say, for content to make fun of the church with.
Yeah, I felt like probably the focus was more on same gender marriage.
Yeah,
because they were both same gender, and then the words that were used in the ceremony, which kind of mirrored some words that are special to us, but basically be fruitful, that's in the Bible, replenish the earth, that sort of thing. And here are two women together. So how's that going to work?
Right.
So that was supposed to be a comedic, I believe, satirical spoof on that.
Yeah.
They do things like this with some of the other colleges when they come in town. It's kind of like their thing. I don't think that the intent was to harm or to hurt, or to, I don't even know if they felt like they would have overstepped anything, any bounds. But apparently for many, they did.
It must have been a reaction.
And so there was a reaction which caused the apology which occurred.
Which is another thing. Is it that they actually saw it and Stanford was like, oh, we need to apologize? Or was it there was backlash and then they had to address it?
It was probably the backlash.
Yeah, exactly. Which
because I think they're hoping, and probably like you do, on your show here,
yeah,
you cross your fingers like, oh, I just said that little thing. I hope that's taken okay, right? So I think that's probably what they had hoped, that we would see that in good humor. But there can be. I mean, even we find in the Islamic community where some have made cartoons of Muhammad, and they would say, "Blessed be his name, peace be upon him," but maybe not intended, to maybe some satire there. But there's really a fine line when it comes to especially religious values of, did I just cross over that? How did people feel? Were they offended? And sometimes it's hard, I think, to have a real take on what's going to happen if I do that.
Right.
And I think maybe that's where Stanford was, where the band was.
Are you aware of any other times that anything like this has happened where they kind of crossed the line or had to apologize or anything, like they went too far?
Well, there were other times, as we traveled different places. Boy, I could name some particular schools, but I won't.
Yeah, you don't need to.
I won't. But being out on the football field, one school, particularly during that time, we always had to wear helmets when we warmed up, because we knew that some fans, not all fans, but some fans would throw the mini alcohol bottles at us out on the field while we were trying to warm up. So if you didn't have your helmet on, then you got hit in the head. That would not be a good experience.
Do you think that was because you were BYU? Was it like a rivalry kind of a thing, or a Mormon persecution kind of a thing?
Well, at the same time, there was a group of people, I remember hearing them chanting about the current prophet, and then just saying some pretty terrible things about that together as a group. Now, I would say that for me at that time, being a younger man, I think that I probably overgeneralized that and thought, well, those people are just that way. But as I got older and got more familiar with that demographic, I learned, no, that was just some people that happened to be at that game and got away with that.
So, and that's interesting. But you don't have to say the school. Was this President Kimball?
Yes,
era?
It was.
So was this kind of a race kind of a thing? Because I know that was when that was kind of a hot button at that time.
No, it wasn't about race. That was just a direct comments, chant on President Kimball.
That's interesting.
Spencer W. Kimball. Yes.
Well, it's interesting that some people, and we don't need to go off on this, but that different people view the church in different eras based on what social issues are relevant during that presidency. Same thing when President Monson died, and when I think it was, I don't remember who it was, a Washington Post or a New York Times, someone did their eulogy announcing that President Monson had passed away, and they're like, and just so you know, this is the Mormon prophet that doesn't support gay marriage or whatever, and then there was so much backlash from that they had to do a redaction and apologize because they completely misrepresented all the good and everything about his life, and he didn't teach or have any policies or anything that were different from any other prophet since the beginning of the church, and yet he's the one that was highlighted as being like non-progressive and intolerant of those rights. President Kimball, I imagine, based on a lot of things in society, had a lot of similar highlight.
Yes, and so I can speak to this as well. Now, this happened a little bit before I got to BYU, but it was a big issue about blacks being able to have the priesthood.
Yeah,
and so, as a matter of fact, at the University of Wyoming, it became a really big thing among the football players. And there was a group of black football players that decided that they would not participate in the game against BYU.
Really?
And the coaches, their coaches were like, what are you doing? Yeah, so we're going to boycott. They actually ended up boycotting the game and would not play BYU because of their stance. And they lost the game because of it. Now,
that's not a triumph for BYU. That's really sad.
Well, the players, how did the players feel? I mean, during this time, it's a hard time. We like, if you served in the military or you played sports, you played with whites and blacks and others together, other races, and you relied on each other. And it was a difficult time. I mean, we felt this is the way it is right now. This is the understanding that we have right now. But our hearts went out to our black brothers. And I don't know if you knew this past season, that there was a special honoring at BYU invited the Wyoming football players.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Where they honored them.
Huh.
And even though it was versus BYU honored them and had them stand before the crowd and everything, and gave them some, really special things, and just celebrated how glad they are that we can all play together.
That's really neat. How many, back in your day playing for BYU, how many blacks were on the team? Well, that's a black and white picture. That won't help me.
Well, wait, isn't everything in black and white?
So there's no gray.
No, I'm not going to count them all, but you're looking at the 1980 Miracle Bowl football team right now, and you can see
if you're
a number of different.
On here.
Yeah,
I'll post it, but
you see some color.
See a lot of afros there.
Yes, and Polynesian too.
Yes, Polynesians always
which today quite a significant amount of players are from Polynesia too. So yes, we had a number of black players who were terrific players.
Yeah.
And who we had just a lot of fun with.
And was the whole team, were they all members of the church?
No. Huh. I would say, most were members of the church, but there was a smaller percentage, not a real small, but maybe I would guess 10-15% that were not members of the church.
And just total curiosity, and this doesn't make or break anything, any topic we're talking about. Were there any black members on the team who were not members of the church that you can remember? You don't have to say a name or anything, but
yes,
there were. That's interesting.
Yes. A matter of fact, that time, most who were black were not members of the church.
Wow.
Some became members of the church during their BYU experience, but not all. And it didn't matter to us.
No,
I mean,
of course,
they're our teammates.
Yeah. And that camaraderie, that team unity is what, that's what makes or breaks the team. And that was a very successful team for those few years. That's really interesting to me, because when you think about BYU, and ever since I was in high school, hearing little bits about BYU, it's always about, we always had visitors come into singles wards and stuff talking about, or who were Tongan or whatever, they're Islanders or Polynesian, they were coming in. And the only reason I remember that is because, I was born in Hawaii, and I was like, oh, they come in, the first thing they do is yell aloha or whatever. They're always, not from Tonga, but they always bring that big spirit, but they're always big, obviously linemen.
Yes.
But they're such nice people. They're so sweet, but they share their testimonies, and they talk about the team, and they talk about what it's like playing for the church school. And when they're sharing that in a presentation to either high school kids or at a fireside or in a sacrament meeting or something, they're not going to talk about the difficult aspects, that does happen. They talk about how great it is being on the team and those good experiences. And I've heard nothing but, well, I don't sound like I have a lot of conversations, so it's not really a good measuring stick, but, I've never heard anyone, talk about any of the difficulties it is. I mean, now you have things with the student body coming, where you have current issues where people come out as homosexual or whatever and all that stuff. That's a whole different subject. But they never shared pain or persecution. I've never heard anyone talk about that until this came up, and I was like, it couldn't have been easy all the time. It's not like you just go out there; it's just another team banging together. Were there in experience in playing games and traveling to different cities and schools? What I mean, I'm imagining there were overnight stays. I'm just sure there were hotel stays and everything. Was it? Were you guys just new other people in town, or like just regular tourists and visitors, or were they like, those are the Mormons?
Yes, those are the Mormons. those are, people knew that we were in town. We had a successful football team then. Sometimes you'd have people, say things, negative things as you're going into the hotel or traveling. But for the most part, people were pretty great.
I was gonna say there had to be good experiences too.
Yeah. It wasn't a negative experience traveling.
Good.
You just have to take that really. If you're the University of Oklahoma and you're going to play Texas, that's a big rivalry. And Oklahoma pulls in town and they're going to their hotel in Texas. You also wonder what they're going to hear. It might be different what we as BYU players might hear, but I guarantee you they'll find things to pick on, to try to get under your skin. So maybe that will rile you up enough that you might not be able to concentrate and win the game. So I think probably that's what all that taunting is about.
Do you think BYU players are maybe because of the church, especially coming from places outside of Utah to play for the school? Do you think they're maybe more equipped isn't the right word, but maybe they're more used to some of that?
I think so. I think probably they've had to talk about their beliefs more, where people have had questions about things that they've learned.
They're used to standing out.
I remember, one time when I was at Phoenix College and I was a racial minority there as well. But great friends. And this one time myself and another friend was with me, both Latter-day Saints. We were cornered after practice and they said, hey, how come you don't go to, our parties? And we never see you there. That's kind of where we all hang out and relax and everything. And then we talked a little bit about how we don't drink and smoke marijuana, do those kinds of things. And they said, I'll tell you what, after the next game, we're going to have a Mormon party. So, and I'm like with my friend, that side eye that you kind of give. Yeah. And so it was like, oh, okay, we'll see. Well, are you coming? And there's probably like 15 guys there. And it was, well, we'll check it out. So after the game, we drive to this location. Of course, the streets are lined with all these cars and everything. And people are running all over the place, the front yard, the backyard, there was a swimming pool. And so before just going in, you got to see these two 18-year-old kids. I said, let's just check out what's going on first. And I said, could you give me a boost? So he puts his hands together, boosts me up. So I look just peer over the top of this fence. I can't really describe the things that were happening in and outside of the pool, but I will say this. There was a picnic table there and there was a nice 6-pack of root beer for us. And that was the Mormon party.
Oh, that's funny. At the empty table.
Well, we decided probably we were going to get some pizza or whatever. So we got out of there. And then the next week when we came back over the weekend on Monday, they all came back and said, hey, where were you? Oh, we were there. Wow. We just didn't go in and we explained kind of why.
Yeah.
And then we had people ask, well, what is this that you don't drink? Tell us about your beliefs. And
there's your teaching opportunity.
So that kind of opened the door for many more friendships and a lot of great things happen.
And how many years did you play for BYU?
I played 2 for BYU and 2 at Phoenix College.
Okay. So I was going to ask if you saw any kind of a shift in acceptance or behavior or anything, but that's probably too small of a window to really have a grasp on that. What about the inverse, where other teams would come to Utah to play BYU if they had to stay? What was that? What was that? What was that like? That welcoming? How was it received, or how did they? Did they feel comfortable or welcome, or did they were like, "Ooh, I don't want to be around these people"?
Well, yeah. So that would be from the local Provo,
Yeah.
area people. They didn't really get involved. They pretty much waited to what happened on the football field.
The student? You mean the locals?
The locals. So
Mm.
if the University of whoever pulled in, they're going to go to their hotel, the Marriott or whatever downtown, and they're just going to get off the bus and go in and probably know people, knowing really that they're coming. Maybe they'll run into some people in the lobby, but yeah, there wasn't really and everything was pretty much out on the field and in the stadium once they got there.
I see.
Now, it might be a little bit different for the University of Utah when they would come down, but they didn't stay overnight.
Because they're close enough.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think there was heavier beef between the University of Utah and BYU than this religious persecution? Did you feel more persecuted going to Rice Stadium than you do going to...
Yeah. I would say that it was pretty much a tie between Rice Stadium and the University of Wyoming.
Really?
That's where it was especially like during a blizzard, and then all the chants and the mini bottles and everything coming down, like only in Wyoming, at a strong wind, that experience. But I will say that so here's the deal with the University of Utah. There was an element of some religious persecution from fans that maybe became disaffected from the church, and they latch on to the University of Utah. University of Utah is not affiliated with the church.
Right.
So if you're going to follow football, and you're not connected with the church, University of Utah may be your team. However, there are a lot of great members who love the U too.
A lot of our prophets have gone to the University of Utah, and Brigham Young, from my understanding of history, he founded the University of Utah before BYU.
He did,
and it wasn't called the University of Utah. But
Elder Worthland played for the U as well. So there really is a great tradition. And what I couldn't say more about Kyle Whittingham, and former BYU player.
Yeah.
And what he's done up at the University of Utah, and how the whole environment and feeling around those games has changed, because each try to show more, at least the players and the coaches show mutual respect with each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I will say there was a lot going on in the stadiums. Now I have a good friend who was an All-American at the University of Utah, and he played for the Miami Dolphins. And he lives up in Boise, Idaho. His name is Steve Clark. He's a great guy. He was a lineman. But he would come over to my house, or I would go to his, when BYU and Utah played each other. And we just had a great, funny and fun experience. He was one of my best friends up there in Idaho. And my wife was able to find a way. She wanted to see the Rose Bowl this last year. And so actually, it's quite a story how it happened, but we happened to have some tickets show up at our front door. It was just amazing. We still don't know who did that.
And where was it going to be?
Pasadena, California. Oh. Yeah, beautiful. That venue is just a beautiful place. So anyway, so she, says, I'd love to go. So we're going to go, and we went to that game. And here I'm a former BYU player. Mm-hmm. So let's just say I didn't overtly wear the red and black. It may have been a little covert, because I love her too, and I want to support her. And I think I was telling you, I sat among the fans at that game, the Utah fans, and they were just awesome. And I got a text during that game, because I took a picture of it on my phone, and I sent the picture of the Rose Bowl game to Steve Clark. And Steve texted back, and he just said, I just want you to know that I think it's great that you're there. Whenever BYU plays somebody, I always root for them unless they play Utah. And I know that you do the same. Now, these are two players who have been there, right?
Yeah.
Not fans, but players. And this is the attitude generally that players have about it. They realize how difficult it is to get there. So why have the animosity? Why bring in things like persecuting people because of their religion or whatever? It's so hard just to play at that level that we try to do the best.
There's a mutual respect.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, I have some friends that don't quite feel that way.
Right.
And I think I've shared what Steve has said with a few of my friends. And I don't think it changed anything. But
so that's really interesting. I think that kind of goes along with what we see in like cancel culture and just a mob mentality that can come up. That I remember the BYU rivalry, and I'm from Colville. It's past Park City. It's closer to the U. We were much more affiliated with the U, but there was plenty of people in Colville that love BYU, and it would come up sometimes in church or whatever, but I mean, not like from the pulpit, people would talk, but I don't remember ever there being like a contentious spirit behind it. And from my friends, a lot of people my closest friends that I went to school with went to the U, and they went to the games and everything, and I don't remember hearing about it or them being all riled up. And it was usually, this was before social media, where it was just usually people when the game time would come and that would happen, there'd be big parties at like pizza parlors and clubs or whatever, where people would be watching the game and just like screaming at the television, having a good time. I don't remember being like a contentious thing, but I don't know. I wasn't in the middle of it. But the teammates, or the players, as you're describing, had a much more professional and rational perspective on it. And that's really great. And really, that's what should matter.
It's different.
I wish it was that way with politics.
Yes. But it is different between the players themselves. They know the pain that it took to go through to get there. They know all the sacrifices, and they know that the players on the other side experience that too.
And the team spirit aside, they have to focus on the game.
That's right. They have a job. They have a job to do, and they've got to focus there.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never been big in sports. I played high school baseball, but we never had like big rivalries. I remember getting excited about that, like homecoming games and things like that, supporting the football team when I would go. But mostly I was just walking around, looking at girls and flirting and having fun with my friends and stuff. Most of my closest friends were actually some of the biggest players, the main players. But I never got into all the college athletics and paid attention. I always support the U because that's where I went to Institute. That's where I took a lot of classes before my mission. And as you were describing, I remembered the conversations that we would have in classes was a lot of the times it was the students bringing over the baggage of things that they just heard in their psychology classes or their politics or ethics, whatever classes they were learning. There would be a little sting of anti-Mormon little tone in there that they would come over and need to have that palate cleansed in Institute, but they would share that and they would talk about it. And I was like, I wasn't taking actual classes, so I didn't know what they were referring to, but I've always understood that there's been that little bit of a dig, a subtle dig that they were picking up in the school. But they have a powerful Institute program. It's the flagship, as I've heard it described. It's amazing. Yeah. And there's a lot of great professors at the U who don't get into that. And I'm grateful that, our church is just like you're describing, the conduct and the focus and the attention for the players being on the game. That's how it should be for us as members of the church that get any dose of persecution or challenges in our testimonies or issues that happen in our lives, that the focus should be on the game, that we don't need to get all riled up, even if it is politics or important things, where it becomes a contentious spirit with other people as fans. We're all on this earth as players. And I think that's a great example for the athletes of the schools Again, this was the band at Stanford.
Yes.
It wasn't it wasn't the school, but it wasn't the players. Had nothing to do with them. And I imagine the BYU's players, they weren't probably not even on the field at the time.
No, I don't remember.
About it later.
I didn't see very many halftime shows.
you were down getting yelled at with
yes.
the chalkboard and circles and X's, right?
But I will say this though, that I think that as a Latter-day Saint, we can look at what happened there at halftime, and we can understand that they, in their own way, try to do something funny or satirical. I'm not sure that we have to take that as a personal affront of something that would tear us down or our religion. And I think just a calm response and continue to be good people and have integrity and be nice to people goes often much further than strong responses.
Right.
Now, if people brought this to the attention of Stanford and they immediately acted on it, that was pretty much taking the high road too. So we got to give it to Stanford too.
Yeah, they did. It's an interesting story, and I brought up as just an interesting topic as someone that's not invested in sports. I don't follow a lot of stories or characters or figures, characters like they're not real people. It was just completely off my radar. And then when I saw the headlines, like, I wonder what Brother Adams thought about that. So I appreciate you coming on and talking a little bit about it. And I think what you just said is right. We as members of the church need to remember to try to, whether we're wearing a uniform, whether we're wearing red or blue, whether we're Republican or Democrat, in a church environment or out walking the streets, we need to remember that we always do represent Christ, whether or not they know we're members of the church, and be humble, have quiet dignity, turn the other cheek, and try not to judge and try and look at things, as you just said. It was played for a joke. It was, not tasteful, but I don't think we need to take everything as harsh. And I haven't read a bunch of comments. I don't follow that. I don't go into comment threads to see how people responded, or if they didn't accept the apology or did accept the apology, if it was a forced apology. None of that matters. The players they're the example in this story, as you just indicated, and we should all be focused on our lives and our own faults and the ways that we offend. Excuse me, that was unprofessional. But we should be focused on us playing the game, and what we need to focus on is our salvation, our weaknesses, and trying not to offend others in any way. So I think that's the core message here. So Brother Adams, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that. I appreciate your friendship and your support for anything I do, feels like.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. And it's been great getting to know you too. And I'm really excited about this podcast broadcast. I think it's going to be really great. Thanks. And I'll be sure to tune in.
Good. I appreciate that. This is you're the second episode. But thanks a lot. And we'll have you on next time something topical comes up that you might have interest in discussing.
Thank you.
All right. Well, everyone else out there, this has been Tim Wilde and Brother Greg Adams of the LDS, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Church Education System. Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Brother Adams for sharing some time with me to talk about this story. I don't think it's about the story itself that's really the important part. I think the important thing is that we learn how we should behave in our lives. And as we talked about, turning the other cheek, being more humble, being more Christ-like, that's the point. We're not going to change people's hearts by, stooping down, going down to their level to become contentious or argumentative. We're going to achieve righteous goals and achieve great missionary work and accomplish things through righteous living and being more Christ-like. And he taught that we need to turn the other cheek when someone offends us or hurts us. On that topic, I wanted to share a quote. This is by Elder H. Brian Richards, who was formerly of the Quorum of the 70 in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one of our general authorities. And he says, talking about this topic, in our own lives, when we find ourselves feeling offended or experiencing contention and strife, let us consider turning the other cheek by asking the question, What can I do for you? In many cases, miracles will happen. Peace will replace contention, and the Spirit of the Lord will be in our hearts. In following the Savior's counsel, we will become his true disciples. I love that because we are in an obligation as members of the church or believers in Christ. If you're listening to this and you're not in the church, that's fine. But as someone that wants to be a good person in general, wants to be Christ-like, and that could be someone that's not Christian who wants to be humble and honest and truthful and faithful and loving and serving, charitable is a better word, like he was. Those are great, really wonderful, powerful, life and world-changing attributes. And we, as members of the church and followers of Christ, disciples of Christ, try to emulate him. We will accomplish his works, which are to bring souls to the Father, right? To help people find salvation in him. Intolerance and offense and contention and frustrations and causing pain to each other on either side of any issue is not going to accomplish that. Yes, express our feelings. Yes, express our opinions and have discussions with people politically, ethically, socially, even religiously with counter perspectives. It's great that Stanford feels so strongly about protecting the community that they were representing in that skit. That doesn't necessarily mean it's appropriate to potentially offend or hurt other people and their standards, which was the church. But as members of the church, we need to look beyond that. We need to rise above it and turn the other cheek and try to ask, like in this quote, what can I do for you? As we reach out to people charitably, honestly, genuinely, with real Christ-like love, that's what's going to touch people's hearts. That's what's going to inspire and help them see who we really are. The teachings of the plan of salvation and why we believe what we believe that lead to our policies and feelings about same-sex marriage and same-sex dating, whatever, on BYU campus, that all comes from our comprehensions and our perspective of the gospel, but that doesn't do them any good if they don't see us as good Christ-like people in the first place. So that's my challenge for me and for all of us, is to find ways to reach out and love others and ask, what can I do for you when we are challenged with opportunities or positions of frustration or pain or persecution. As victims, don't be a victim. Just rise up, have faith in Christ, and know that he went through everything, and we're not going to get through this without suffering something like he did. So those are my feelings, and if you are struggling with things and you find it too hard to let go or too hard to rise above something like that, to not get into the contentious side of life, reach out and find people that have more safe values and feelings or beliefs, as you find some place that you can remove yourself from that contentious situation, if at all possible. Find people that can help you harness that feeling of love, that you can reach out and share it with others and find that peace, knowing that God loves you. And I love you, and I hope we can all find a less contentious world by reaching out with love to each other. So I know that he lives, I know he's there for us, and he doesn't want us fighting amongst ourselves, because that spirit of contention is of the devil, as he taught in the Book of Mormon. So there's that. Those are my thoughts. That was a wonderful discussion. Thanks again to Brother Adams, and thank you for listening, and we will catch you guys later on Wilde Discourse.